Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Savin, and welcome to the Center for Security Policy. This is a private webinar featuring special guests, Senator Bob Hall and Representative Tony Tinderholt. Invitations for this webinar were sent to a select group of mostly Texans who are friends of the center. In the wake of the most recent deadly blackout, we thought you all deserved to hear from the members of our team and members of your legislature who have been fighting to secure the grid for years. Moderating this webinar is Tommy Waller, Director of Infrastructure Security at the Center. Tommy is a combat veteran, U.S. Marine Lieutenant Colonel, currently serving in the reserves as the commanding officer of the 3rd Force Recon Company. As part of his civilian job at the Center, he directs and manages the nationwide Secure the Grid Coalition. Tommy.
Yeah, Adam, thank you for introducing us. You mentioned the military service. I'm not the only veteran here. In fact, all three of us are veterans, and I think all three of us would agree that really nothing that we ever did in uniform or would ever do could actually affect the survival of the citizens of this nation or the citizens of Texas, for example. And it's really the people who keep the lights on that I want to thank right now, those who maintain really the lifeblood of our modern civilization, the electric grid. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the fact that just last month, the world's 10th largest economy went dark, that the grid in Texas collapsed, causing more than $47 billion. That's just the cost of electricity, and over $100 billion worth of economic loss. And the thing that is most painful is the thought of how it upended people's lives, not just the environmental implications and personal and financial implications, but people lost their lives. For a second, I would just ask everybody to just pause for one short moment of silence to think about those families in Texas who lost loved ones during this blackout. For me, it engenders a little bit of anger to think that Texas experienced a similar blackout in 1989, again in 2011. That for about $4.5 billion, the state could have winterized and hardened its electric infrastructure to prevent the type of catastrophe that we saw. Now that I would consider to be righteous anger. And what I want you all to understand and think about for a moment before we get started is that St. Augustine once said that hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to ensure that they won't remain the way they are, right? And so if we can get righteously angry about what just happened and have the courage to fight this, we can give people hope. Speaking of daughters, speaking of the beautiful daughters of Texas, a couple of acknowledgments. There are in this audience, and probably some that couldn't make it, daughters of Texas that have helped immensely in this fight. Tracy Bradford comes to mind. Lee Wamschgantz comes to mind. Diana Denman, Congresswoman Beth Van Dyne, Jackie Deason. I know there are many others, but there are daughters of Texas that have been giving us hope in this fight for years. But the two people who I think give us the most hope, at least for me, are the two legislators that we have now before you. The state has 130 representatives, so you've got 129 others, 30 other senators. The two that are on this webcast today are the ones that I think have done the absolute most when it comes to the fight to secure the Texas electric grid. In May 2014, just after I entered the Center for Security Policy, Frank Gaffney, the founder, sat me down at his house in Leesburg, Virginia, and told me about the vulnerabilities of the grid, opened my eyes to threats like electromagnetic pulse and others, and asked me, hey, take over this Secure the Grid Coalition and start in Texas. And what I didn't know at the time, and what I'm so grateful for now, is that very same month, these two gentlemen had unseated incumbent Republicans in their districts to become legislators of your state. So I want to take just a moment and thank them for being here, thank them for their service in uniform in the military, and just ask each one of them to give us just a quick introduction to what led them to join the Texas legislature. Representative Tinderholt, we'll start with you, sir, and then go to Senator Hall.
You know, like you mentioned, I'm a veteran. I spent 10 years in the Air Force as a linguist doing counter-drug missions around the world. And I got out after 10 years with a bachelor's degree and went to the corporate world, did some things out at the Defense Intelligence Agency. And make a long story short, September 11th happened. And 3 days later, I just felt obligated. I was the right age, had the right skill sets. I decided to join the Army as an officer, and I did that. Spent another 11 years in the Army. So I did 21 years, combat tours, you name it, normal, like everybody that's in the military. And, you know, I just felt like continuing my service to the people. My entire adult life I've served, and I wanted to continue that service to this great nation and the great state that I live in, which is Texas. I love my country, I love my state, and I love the people that live here. And I just wanted to continue to protect the rights of the people that live here. And it's really, really that simple.
Well, Representative, I appreciate you being here, and you have been a champion on this topic for sure. We appreciate that service. Senator Hall, I remember, I have to just share with the audience for a second, when Frank directed me to Texas, I didn't really have much of an idea where to start. Thank goodness some of the ladies I mentioned before had the ability to introduce me to some good people. But really, I flew to Texas for the inauguration of Governor Abbott with nothing but a prayer and Peter Pry. Those who don't know Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, he's the Chief of Staff of the Congressional EMP Commission. And Dr. Pry and I showed up in Austin, and again, just praying that we'd find the right people. We ended up with the help of some of those ladies and the help of our Lord in the same elevator with Senator Hall, who we quickly discovered, in fact, had been involved in the hardening of the Minuteman ICBM against electromagnetic pulse of all things. So here we have the Congressional EMP Commission's Chief of Staff, one of the most knowledgeable EMP experts in the country, knowing all the same people that Senator Hall knew for the first time we met him. So, Senator, if you would share with us a little bit about what caused you to want to serve in the legislature.
Well, first of all, Tommy, thank you for having me on here, and with Tony Tinderholt, my good friend in the House, and had the honor to be able to work with him now, having come in about the same time and under very similar circumstances. But to take it from where you described it, because I never expected to end up on the Minuteman program, but I did after graduating from the Citadel. I had a degree in electrical engineering, and I ended up being assigned to the research and development arm of Minuteman in the mid 60s. And about 2.5 years after I'd been there, I discovered the threat of the EMP. It was called the pin down threat. I won't go into the details behind it. Most everybody knows it, but they recognized they had to harden the Minuteman missile against this threat. It was very vulnerable. And so I ended up being assigned the project officer for that. And that took us quite a little while to do it, but we managed to successfully come up with a design and implementation plan. And then after I left the Air Force to go into private industry, the aerospace industry, I never really talked to anybody about it because it was such a highly classified program. It was probably the highest classification there was because it involved the operational readiness of our major offensive strategic missile system, but never talked to anybody about it. Spent almost 30 years in industry and ended up in business by myself. And then about 11 years ago, I saw a magazine laying in a doctor's office that had on the cover of it, I believe it was Popular Mechanics, that talked about the electric grid vulnerability to an EMP. And I said, wow, that's interesting, because it was not an issue when I was in the Air Force with the concerned about the missile, because the nuclear exchange, we didn't expect this electricity to survive anyhow. But I read that, got interested in it. It tweaked my interest, and then I'll kind of skip forward. Wasn't long. That was about that time I got involved in the Tea Party because I was very apolitical, never been involved in politics at all. I'm still a recovering political apathetic, but I'm working on it. And I got very heavily involved with the Tea Party and working to get other people elected. We recognized that the issues we were fighting could be best solved by having righteous people elected to office. So spent a bit of time and very successful in first couple of elections and getting quite a few House members elected, as a matter of fact. And it came around to the next election, and my district had the most liberal Republican in Texas as its senator, been there for 12 years. Spent 2 years trying to get somebody to run against him. Nobody would do it. And got near filing time, and my wife and I just talked about it and really decided for a time such as this, if not us, who, and if not now, when. We prayed about it and decided to file and run. And next thing I knew, I was elected and I'd become a Texas state senator. I'd met Frank Gaffney and then later ran into Peter Pry, and the conversations of I was so unaware of what the current situation in Texas was, or with the grid system. I didn't even realize that Texas had its own electric grid, but I'd agreed that certainly we need to get a bill going and do something about the Texas grid. We did, and we filed it. We got it out of the Senate that session, and the next two after. 3 sessions in a row, we got a bill to protect the grid out. Each time it got to the House, and the power companies had far more influence in the House, and so it managed to die. They managed to kill it over there. How this last session, we came very, very close. Had 24 out of 31 senators voted for it, far more than needed to pass it. Got to the Senate, and Tony worked with him, and he and the current Speaker of the House, Dave Phelan, was the chairman of State Affairs. And he and Tony worked, and they got it out of State Affairs with pretty good margin on the vote. But it went into a committee called the Calendars Committee, which is kind of a black hole in the House where bills seem to die with a little bit of influence from the outside. So, and the big hurdle, and Tony, you can chime in on this, but the big hurdle we had, as I look back on it, was really getting people to comprehend what it would be like to not have electricity. I just realized that people just, when you tell them about the electricity being gone, being down for a week, a month, a long time, and the tragedy that would bring, it's just too overwhelming for them to think about it. So they just say, well, yeah, it's kind of so, you have to, it's something that they had to experience to catch on. Well, unfortunately, we had that experience a couple of weeks ago when the power went out, and most Texans ended up not having electricity for some period of time, some longer than others. All of a sudden realized that what Tony and I had been saying, that electricity is the third most important thing to sustaining life, was indeed true. Matter of fact, you might move it up to second place, because without electricity, you don't get water. And they experienced that. So you might say that electricity is the second most important thing to sustaining life. But I think that experience of a number of people, I know it prompted my phone, my text messages, my emails, and the comments I've gotten from people. And I know Tony's gotten the same thing. You guys were right. We should have listened to you. Now, what we were proposing wouldn't necessarily have impacted what happened this last month, but the concept of having a reliable, resilient grid system all of a sudden became, hey, we need to make sure that doesn't happen again.
I think, Senator, actually, and we'll go back to this in just a moment. I want to go back to some of the previous legislative sessions. I think it actually could have made an effect, and we'll explain why in a minute. You had mentioned Representative Tinderholt, just like you, having observed having so many people call. I'm actually interested to find, because I know both of you gentlemen sat through hours and hours and hours of hearings with ERCOT, with the utility companies from Texas, members of the government, the public service commissioner, the public utility commissioners. So Representative Tinderholt, what are some takeaways? What are some of the things that you think this audience should know about that elected officials like yourself learned throughout that process of hearings?
To be perfectly honest with you, that we've made huge mistakes. We knew in '89, we knew in 2011, and we should have acted. All of those times we should have acted. We should have acted the last 3 sessions. Some things about this session we learned that even I didn't know is ERCOT shut off power at some of the gas well heads that fed the power plant. I never would have known that. Gas prices skyrocketed and could have potentially caused the power companies to file for bankruptcy, and I think maybe a couple have, or they're going to.
One has.
That's all stuff that people may not have predicted, but it's all made of our own doing. A person flipped switches and made that stuff happen. Someone made the decision to increase gas prices. But I think the biggest takeaway from what we just saw is that no matter what the cost, and it's going to be reasonable, but no matter what the cost, you can't put a price tag on 60 plus lives. My family and I had no power for 4 days. We ended up having to leave our home, and we had frozen pipes, and I didn't have it nearly as bad as the people that passed and people that couldn't go somewhere else. So I'm not complaining. I'm just saying people experienced how bad it can really be. And this is just one topic. This is one piece of what this bill is. This is protect the grid from all hazards. So we're talking about weather. We're talking about people making poor decisions. We're talking about EMPs from nations like China that have said they have the weapon systems that can take out our grid, solar flares, everything. We have to protect our grid from everything. And I think one thing that I took away is we cannot be narrow-minded. What I mean by that is we can't worry about just this one topic, this one thing that happened a couple weeks that was horrific. We have to worry about all the other stuff, because if we don't, those are going to cause this to happen. And then we'll look back and wish we had.
Representative, you're absolutely right. And I want to go back for a moment and mention that one of the bills that Senator Hall filed last session would have created a commission that would have looked at all hazards. So an effective body within the state that's not completely controlled by the utility industry, that has the charter to look at all hazards, may well have looked at the 2011 blackout and then asked the question, hey, did we take any of these steps? So I think that even in years past, the legislation that you all sponsored that didn't become law could have actually helped in this case. But we know for certain right now that that's the plan, right? Going forward, that you have legislation that's meant, as you said, Representative Tinderholt, to not just address winterization, but all hazards. So I want to ask you for a second to just talk about that.
Let me mention that to you. So,
yes, sir.
So when I talk about all hazards, I mentioned that other stuff. We didn't even get to the part about renewable energy. So wind and solar,
right?
That's a potential hazard and danger to our power grid. Using it as supplemental power is great, but they never have to commit to ERCOT or the PUC how much power they're going to add any given day to the grid. But all the power plants, the power producers have to. And so when I visited ERCOT, they said one of the hardest parts about predicting was they have to tell all these other power plants how much to produce at any given time. And what really fluctuates that is the wind and solar. So that's something that we also have to look at. It's great to have that supplemental power, but we can never look at it as primary power. We gave estimates are about $19 billion over the last 10 years for that. And that stopped us from building more natural gas plants, which we have an abundance of, and nuclear. So that's a huge hazard. I look at that as a hazard, and I think Senator Hall would agree with that, that's another thing we need to consider when we're talking about hazards to the grid.
Right, the form of generation. There's a difference between, like you say, intermittent power that's coming from solar and wind, and baseload power, which you would get from things like nuclear, coal, and to a certain extent, natural gas. Of course, natural gas has its own vulnerabilities depending on the site, if it's dependent on pipelines. And in this particular blackout, I think you all mentioned some of those interdependencies were significant issues, where you had the electric utility providers, the electric grid, providing electricity to the compressors that pressurize the pipes to get the natural gas to the generators. And then so if the grid goes down, they can't get the natural gas to generate more power for the grid. The point that you made, Representative Tinderholt, about ERCOT not being able to predict, they've got to look at and say, what is the weather saying? How much wind and how much solar are we going to get? These are things that if there's an independent grid security commission charged with looking at resilience, not just incentivizing environmental protection, which is important, but incentivizing resilience, then I think we could start to overcome some of that. So with that said, Senator Hall, you have a bill. In fact, I have a copy of the draft, and I have to say I'm extremely excited about this. I'd ask you to just, if you could, whatever you're comfortable with sharing, I know it should be filed soon, tell us a little bit about the legislation, if you would, and then a little bit about what you think may be different about this session and last session when it comes to actually taking this and filing it and getting it through the process.
All right. Well, thank you, Tommy. And I will tell you that you're going to get to be able to announce it is filed. It is going to be SB 1606. The ink is still wet on the paper. It was just filed. Our companion bill to it that we'll talk about also for the acquisition of equipment for the system is SB 1488. That's going to be Buy American on grid equipment. But our bill that we're working on we have now establishes the Texas Grid Security Commission, and it will be established not within the power structure of ERCOT and PUC, but it will be under the Texas Emergency Management Division. We call it TETM. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One is it is probably one of the best organized, best run agencies in the state. And the other is they don't have a dog in the fight when it comes to providing electric power. So they are not going to have the undue influence of ERCOT and the PUC. ERCOT and the PUC are replete with people cycling in and out from the power companies. And so they are really very much like NERC and FERC. They are incumbent in owing where they came from and where they're going next to the power companies. Now they will be part of the commission, but it will be managed and run and controlled by TETM. And it will be looking for the development of a reliable, resilient grid system of all hazards, not just EMP or GMD or cyber or physical, but weather-related things that, in addition to it, all like what we experienced. Anything that could take the grid system down will be part of it. So when we look at fixes or what needs to be done to it, we take into consideration all of the threats and come up with the most efficient, integrated solution for it. And they will be tasked with coming back with a report in a year that says this is what needs to be done.
So, and Senator Hall, if you would, what's different about the response that you're getting from your colleagues, right? Like in years past, we literally saw other elected officials file similar bills to yours that seemed to be a bit watered down, maybe at the behest of special interests, and push those through the legislature, kind of almost in a way to get yours off the table. What's different now about what you're experiencing?
Well, I kind of the biggest thing is the realization of what happened just a couple of weeks ago in actually losing power, that all of a sudden people realize that it's not a pipe dream, it's not a theoretical thing that maybe could happen, but gee, it's never ever happened before, so why would we think it's been real? I mean, you can talk about the Carrington event, we can talk of 1859, we can talk about the blackout in Canada in 1979, we can talk about the blackout in northeast part of the United States in 1989. All real for those people up there, but that's not Texas, and they didn't experience it. So they didn't have that experience. This past week, you had almost everybody in Texas had their power go out for some period of time, or they knew people who did have it. And so all of a sudden it became real. And I think that's what I had a couple of joint authors last time. This time I got 24 joint authors
24
on it. Democrats 24. And 24 joint authors out of 31 in the Senate. So it takes 18 to get it to the floor and 16 to pass it. So we have the authors on the two primary committees that it go to, we have a significant majority of those members are joint authors on the bill. So the recognition of the fact that, as Tony was talking about, we had back in 2011, they had an opportunity, recognized the problem of the weather issue, and they refused to do anything about it. They kicked the can down the road. We've got the can now, and I think most people feel like I do, and I know Tony feels this way because that's what he just said. I don't want the legislature in 2031 looking back and saying, "Oh my gosh, we just lost power. Why didn't those senators and representatives fix this problem in 2021 when they knew it was a problem and they knew what they needed to do to fix it? Why didn't they do it? And now we've got a real tragedy on our hands." Because the next time this happens, we may not be so fortunate as what we were. We didn't mention it in this process. We came within seconds of actually burning up the entire grid system, of it shutting down, where we'd have to go to a black start, shutting it down completely, which would probably have taken us weeks, most likely months, to bring it back up again, the entire state of Texas. And as you said, that would have taken out a state that, if it were a separate nation, is the 9th largest economy in the world. And while we had about 60 people die, I can't imagine how many would have died if we were to lose our power for months or weeks. And so if we don't, the worst thing about a tragedy is if you don't do something about it. If you just, "Oh, that was too bad, it won't ever happen again." It would be irresponsible, absolutely irresponsible of us at this point to say, "Well, it's not going to happen again. That's a one-time event, and I don't care, pick 1,000 years, whatever it is, a one-time event." No, it's not. It's demonstrated to us that we have a very vulnerable electrical grid system that very well could be lost. And if it is, it will be tragic for the people of Texas. And I think that's what people now realize.
What a blessing. I want to ask Representative Tinderholt what he's experienced in terms of his colleagues. There's many more, obviously, 131 that are going to need to make a decision whether or not to support this. And so, as you mentioned, Senator, for a state that produces enough energy to power every single American home for 4.5 years annually, you produce that much energy, no excuse for the grid to go down. So, Representative Tinderholt, what kind of impression are you getting from your colleagues when it comes to this legislative process? As Senator Hall said, normally dies, the bills die in the House. What are you seeing right now that you can share with the audience?
Well, I'm going to be totally honest with you and tell you that I think everyone in the Texas House wants to fix the problem we just had. Okay. But I'm not convinced that there's a whole lot of interest in trying to fix the other issues. And so the reason that Senator Hall's bill is so good is it talks about all hazards. What I mean by that is everyone has a lot of pressure on them and they don't want that to happen again. And it's what happened is right in front of them or just right behind us. So everyone wants to handle that one issue. But I don't think that there's a huge appetite to deal with EMP, solar flares, that type of stuff of getting attacked because it hasn't happened. And so what I really like about this bill is that it addresses all hazards, regardless of what they are. There's probably hazards that you're an expert. Senator Hall and I have gotten really good at this. There's hazards out there that he and I and you probably don't know about. So I really, really like this bill because it does all hazards. It seeks to find them all and rectify and mitigate all of them. So I'm pretty excited about this bill.
I would tell you that I've never seen in the definition section, I've never seen a more thorough definition of all hazards. I mean, we're even talking about supply chain issues, insider threats. Rarely do you ever see anything beyond maybe cybersecurity, physical security. Just today, there was testimony by the CEO of NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, where they talked about this extreme weather event. You look through this whole document, all you see is a discussion of extreme weather. To your point, Representative Tinderholt, we need to be concerned about all hazards. So I'm very excited about the fact that this bill addresses it. Now, we're about halfway in to this webinar. I want to make sure that we give the audience a good amount of time to ask questions. Unfortunately, I was taking a look, and for whatever reason, I can start to see questions come in, but they're really, really tiny. So I'm going to ask my colleague, Adam Savitt, to start kind of going through and giving us some of the questions that are coming across from our audience. That way, I mean, this is an opportunity for our audience to share time with their elected officials. And I guess between the three of us, we'll do the best that we can to answer those questions, at least for the next 20 or so minutes before we close out. So Adam, I don't know if you can start to kind of share some of those with us. We'll do our best.
Sure, just a moment. Is a blackout like this possible to happen to other U.S. electric grids?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is the entire United States is vulnerable. This is not unique to Texas. What is unique about Texas is we have our own electrical grid. There are three grids in the U.S. There's the Eastern, the Western, and Texas. And there are threats. They're all equally vulnerable to the threats.
Absolutely.
You've addressed some of these, but have any steps been taken to prevent another Texas blackout in the future?
The only, but Tony, you can chime in here, but the only steps that have been taken is to recognize that we had a problem, and we are holding hearings. We've had the House has been holding hearings. The Senate has been holding multiple hearings going late into the night, trying to get to the bottom of understanding how this one happened and what all the contributors were to it. And that's one of the first steps we have to take for the weather related, because we have a combination here of and I want to make sure we get them separated out and we don't get the two confused. We have system failures as a result of operational procedures that took place, and we have problems with not being resilient to the weather factor that was out there. They went together and the combination caused the problem, but what we are addressing here primarily is the physical hardness, sturdiness, weather-worthy structure of the operation. The way it's operated between the PUC and ERCOT will be a separate overlay that will take care of the administrative contributions to the failure of it.
There's a question from Dan Gibbs of Houston. I'll make sure that I'm reading verbatim his words here. Which are the two best secure the grid bills now before the Senate and House? And what is the most serious threat to the passage of each? Please be specific and name names if necessary.
You know, I'd like to touch on that first. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, not just because Senator Hall's on this call. He's got a high bill number. His bill number should have been a low bill number. And what that means is it's got all the support of leadership. I think the best bill right now is Senator Hall's bill. And I think the companion to it that's either authored already or going to be authored is going to be the best House bill. But there are going to be some bills that are really important to do quick fixes, immediate fixes to those processes that failed, and to fix the things that we saw 2 or 3 weeks ago that caused what they did. But if I had to pick a couple of bills, it would be the Senate and the House bills that we're talking about right now. Those are going to be some of the most important ones, aside from the handful that are going to be being pushed to the indirect because of what just happened. Some people authored bills for that. And look, I don't think that any one bill is going to get it perfect, right? The bill that has the best opportunity with all hazards defined, just like Tommy said, perfectly defined, is Senator Hall's bill.
So one of the things I'd like to add to that for Mr. Gibbs is that what we're doing with the Secure the Grid Coalition, in fact, one of the ladies I mentioned before, Tracy Bradford, is helping with this, is to compile a timeline and all the bills in the past that were supposed to address this, that didn't pass, that can got kicked down the road. We're going to compile that so it can be entered into testimony. The other thing we're going to do is analyze all the bills that are in. So there's 7 or 8 right now that have already been filed. And we have a Secure the Grid Coalition with the nation's foremost experts on these topics that on a weekly basis, we meet over the phone, we discuss these things, and then we can send out that language for analysis and then bring it back and provide it to the lawmakers with our best judgment of what the goods, bads, uglies, and then be ready to testify either in support of legislation or cautioning the legislature if there are bills that are problematic. And so we absolutely plan on doing that, Mr. Gibbs. Adam, other questions?
Question from Fred Reitman. Where do you expect to be the most resistance to your bill to come from? What assistance from us do you need?
I'd like to answer that. Just the first part. I'll let you take the second part, sir. I think we're going to say the same thing. The power companies, they don't want to spend the money. I mean, we get pushback. Their lobby comes in. They've got a lot of money. They push studies. I mean, simply put, I think it's going to be the electric companies that are going to give the biggest.
Tony's absolutely right. There are legislators who are more influenced by the power companies, and they have been the major opposition to it. I am absolutely convinced that we've got too many power companies here in Texas, and I'm sure it's across the nation, who are run by executives who are more concerned about their personal paycheck and their bonus than they are about doing what is right for the state or the country. And I think they will continue to push back. They will have excuses that say they will do something on their own. They don't need the government involved in it. I think they've had ample opportunity to do something, and they've done precious little. I think right now our role in government is to protect the people. And when industry out there is not doing the right thing for the people, particularly when it comes to their safety and our national security, we have an obligation to step up and do what's necessary so the people are protected.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, Senator Hall, in just a moment. I want to talk specifically about the industry influence and then about how your bill can cut through that. First, though, I know Frank Gaffney's got an awesome new television show that he had to miss the first part of this. Adam, I don't know if you can tune Frank in. If we can, I would like to see if I can hand it over to Frank for a moment to talk to the audience. We have to really credit Frank with a lot of what we know about this issue. As I mentioned before, he sat me down at his house in Leesburg and just opened my eyes to this incredible vulnerability, and I'm grateful for that. So, Adam, is it possible to bring Frank in?
I don't think I can get him on screen. He's just a viewer. I'm sorry. Okay. He could perhaps type up something. But
okay. Yeah, see if you can send him a link. We still got another 20 minutes or so if we can bring Frank on, that'd be great. If not, I'll ask him.
I see a good question. I'd kind of like to answer if you don't mind me. I think it's from Carl. How do we stop reauthorization of Section 313, the massive subsidy from Texas taxpayers for wind and solar power development? I'll keep it very brief, but you can rest assured that I'm handling that. It's already being worked. We will work it with amendments on the House floor for Section 313. And look, Texas Wind is not held accountable for every single wind tower that they put up for getting 10 high-paying jobs in the area, and they get a waiver for it every time. We'll take that away. And then I want them to have to tell ERCOT how much power they're going to provide at any given time to the grid. They have to do what everybody else does. And if they can't, then they need to have small power stations within there to create that additional flow. But we've got a lot working, and that reauthorization of Section 313, my staff's already working it, and that's one of my top priorities this session, along with what we're talking about now.
Representative, thank you for grabbing that question. And Adam, I do want you to keep helping us with that. Fred Reitman had the last question. For a second, I just want to thank Fred. Fred has testified before the Senate and House in favor of these grid security bills. Fred, thank you for that. Tom Glass as well. There's a number of participants, whether they're on here or not, that I just want to thank. So, Adam, what other questions do we have?
From Carl Zebarth. Sorry if I said that wrong. How do we stop reauthorization of Section 313? I think it is the massive subsidy from Texas.
That's the one I just did.
Oh yeah,
that's the one I just stole. I stole it from you, Adam. I'm sorry.
One moment. He's asking also, can you send us the specifics by bill number and responsible committee? We need to lobby our local reps. Maybe we should do that in writing after the event.
Yeah, so on that topic, folks. One of the things that our Secure the Grid Coalition does is figures out, and it really goes back. I wish Frank could join us. His vision for the Center for Security Policy is the special forces and the war of ideas, right? How does the special forces operational detachment work in ODA? They go out and they are on the ground fighting the fight with the local community, bringing national level assets, intelligence, warfighting capabilities down to that local level. That's exactly what the Center for Security Policy does with the Secure the Grid Coalition. We've got the nation's foremost experts. We consolidate their inputs. We bring it down where the rubber meets the road. I hope that this year we can figure out a way to hone all of the emphasis of our coalition, which is nationwide, on Texas. And so part of what we intend to do is to help figure out who needs to be contacted, who needs to be briefed. I will travel all over your state to give briefings to whoever needs it, and then figure out how to get the public involved. And I think we need to talk a little bit about the federal government here, because I know both of these lawmakers do not want the federal government to come in and tell you how to run the show. And I agree. Why? Because the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has done no better. In fact, if anything, worse when it comes to protecting the grid from all hazards. So bad that one of our Secure the Grid Coalition members has actually sued FERC. We're in a lawsuit with FERC over that. And so if you would, gentlemen, tell us your thoughts about whether or not, because we hear it already, hey, we need to have the federal government take over Texas grid. Tell us what you think about that.
You want me to take it, or would you like to?
Yeah, I think that would be one of the worst possible solutions. I've watched and listened to what NERC and FERC has done, and Tommy, you're absolutely right. Where they have gotten involved in making a false attempt to try to develop standards on the threats of EMP, and GMD, they have done so that at levels that would be totally meaningless if they were implemented. And so my fear of getting involved with the federal government is that if something was done, it would be for eyewash. It would be for show only, and would leave us much more vulnerable than what we are if nothing was done. There is nothing positive that could possibly come out of our becoming a part of the national grid, or having the federal government get involved in it. It would set us back.
And let me just, Tommy, there's no super secret reason why we have our own grid. I think it was 1935. President Roosevelt started regulating power in our nation, and Texas didn't want our power grid for interstate power regulated, and we've stayed that way. We don't want them involved because what they do is not good. And think about all the issues you see in Washington, D.C. Is that what you want running the Texas power grid? And I think the answer is absolutely not.
Right. And let me just explain for the audience real quick, because there is a way that right now you can get involved in this fight. It does involve the federal government, but let me just explain how. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, is who approves or disapproves the reliability standards that are set by NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. Okay, those are the same standards that have to be abided by in Texas. Those reliability standards, we think, were either insufficient or insufficiently enforced. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the blackout that we just did. What our Secure the Grid Coalition did with the leadership of a Texas resident, Command Sergeant Major Michael Mabee, is we opened and we lodged a formal complaint with FERC about this. And they've given now a 30-day period where the public can intervene on a legal docket, calling on an investigation about those reliability standards. So I just share that with you because right now you can go to securethegrid.com, click on Take Action, and it will allow you an entire guide of how to show you that. It's going to get their attention and have them to investigate this. So I just want to share that with you. It's not a request the federal government takes over, but it's a request that the federal government be put on notice that their standards are insufficient, as mentioned by both of these lawmakers. Now, one of the things that I also want to mention, when we talk about NERC and FERC and the problems, power industry, 9 out of 12 of its board of trustees represent the industry, not the people. That's different in Senator Hall's bill. In Senator Hall's bill, this Grid Security Commission.
Sorry to interrupt. I think we have Frank, at least by audio, if you want to cue him up.
Okay.
Frank, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm sorry that this has been so difficult, and I don't have a whole lot to add to it. Honestly, you've got the first string already in place and doing brilliantly. I just wanted to say a special word of thanks to all of our regents in Texas who are on the call for having enabled us to bring this problem to your attention long before that nasty business descended on you a couple of weeks ago. And I couldn't be more proud of the partnership that we've had with you all in Texas, and most especially with those like, your fabulous State Senator Hall and fabulous Representative Tommy. And Tommy Waller. I mean, we've just got terrific people now in place working the problem, drawing on the kinds of things that we at the Center for Security Policy and the Secure the Grid Coalition have been doing for years, but bringing it to bear now with the wind at their backs, hopefully, not so chilly a wind, to actually get Texas fixed and get it the model for the nation that it needs to be. So just bless you all, and thank you for letting me pop in briefly and carry on.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, I really appreciate, Frank, you giving us this charter, right? I mean, we're here to secure freedom for the next generation. There won't be any if we can't keep the lights on. And so it's a privilege to have the opportunity to be the watchdog for the country, because that's what we are. We're the watchdog for the country. And so that's what we hope. Senator Hall's legislation, as I mentioned, has a grid security commission. At least 3 members have to be members of the public that support the public interest. That's the same number of representatives from the utility industry. So that's a 1-for-1 split. So there's just so much hope that we have, I think, from what we have here and from our leaders that are on the line. We've got about 12 minutes left. I know both lawmakers are going to have to jet out immediately following this, if not sooner. So I do want to see if there's any other questions, Adam, that we may have missed so far.
Yes. Are there any federal representatives or senators who understand this problem?
There are.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Our governor has received a letter from all of the Republican congressmen, I believe in 15 and in 17.
Twice.
Was a letter from them urging him to take action on this bill. I don't know whether we're going to be able to get another letter this time out of them. It would be very helpful if we did, because getting the governor to agree to this is one of the major gates we have to go through. And so far, the honest answer is he hasn't shown much support for this. And so anybody that has a relationship with him or understands this, that could help explain to him how important this is, it would certainly be helpful to it.
That's right. So I'll just say it. 2 letters, 2015, 2018, congressional delegation, warnings about everything Senator Hall just mentioned. Warnings that were ignored, and so see where we are now, right? So and that's where what I'm hoping, okay, and thankfully, and I don't know if David Tice or David Womack are on the line right now. There's 2 Davids at the moment making 2 separate documentaries, probably going to come out around the same time this spring, summer. That these documentaries are going to lay out all these hazards. They're going to lay out the saga which has been this fight. These producers have been working on it for years. And so what I hope and pray for is an opportunity where our coalition can work with people in Texas to bring the documentaries out, let people view them, wake the people up, share that information. As Senator Hall said, begin to get the influencers in this state to talk to the right people so that they'll take action. And so that's what I hope that we can accomplish. Adam, I'm curious if you have any more questions. We can keep going, and then I'll have the legislators give us some final thoughts.
A companion question: has the Biden administration discussed any plans to protect the grid?
Actually, then just the opposite. President Trump had issued 2 executive orders, one to all of the agencies in the federal government to take action to start preparing to protect themselves and to protect the grid, and a second one to prohibit the continuing purchase of major components, transformers, and control systems from China. And Biden has rescinded both of those executive orders. Now we've got a second bill here in Texas that is also as a companion to the one we've been talking about, that specifically is going to prohibit power companies from purchasing their transformers or any other control equipment from a country that could be an adversary.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Hall, for that. Yeah, there's more than 300 transformers in the grid right now that were manufactured in China, at least 200 of which are large power transformers, which take 12 to 18 months to replace just one of those. This was such a threat that under the Trump administration, the federal government seized one of these transformers at the port of Houston, right there in Texas, and transported under federal escort to Sandia National Laboratories to tear it apart and figure out what was inside of it after the federal government found one of these high power transformers with extra hardware backdoors that would allow an adversary to potentially remotely shut that down. So as Senator Hall mentioned, President Biden on his first day in office suspended the executive order for 90 days that President Trump passed to secure the supply chain. Our Secure the Grid Coalition immediately wrote letters to Secretary Granholm, who's now confirmed. We are doing everything we can to get to the civil servants that have been appointed under the Biden administration to ask them not only to reinstate that executive order, but to strengthen its enforcement. Because thus far, the federal government has been entrenched against taking action to protect the grid against electromagnetic pulse, geomagnetic disturbances, and even supply chain vulnerabilities.
All right,
You know, I'd like to mention something too. While we're talking about the Chinese, and this will kind of be my closeout, I think. There's a couple of other bills, other threats that people aren't thinking about in regards to the Chinese. Representative Cyrier has a bill that will stop what I'm going to tell you about from happening. Representative Morales has a bill that will allow county commissioners to decide who gets to put power onto the grid down there. So a Chinese officer who retired bought thousands of acres in Valverde County, and he just got the go-ahead from the federal government to put up a wind farm. Well, they not only do they have the okay to do it, they have the okay to tie into the Texas power grid. So think about it. The Chinese military officer comes to the U.S., buys power, gets permission from our government to tie into the Texas power grid. We have serious issues. So while we're talking about all the bills this session, I want to make sure we also talk about those two. I don't have the two bill numbers on hand, but when you talk about the Chinese, we need to also be supporting those two bills. Representative Cyrier, I think it's in the 700 series, and Representative Morales, and I cannot remember his bill number. Those are super important. And I would tell you to stay involved, participate with your state representatives, senators, congressmen, and be involved, because when they're hearing it from 2, 5, 8, 10 people, it's nothing like hearing it from 100 people. So please stay involved. It's more important than a lot of other things we're doing. This is so critical right now. We're at a tipping point. We've never been where we are right now. We're in a position where we can actually make this happen and be the example for our nation.
Thank you, Representative. And those of you, I want to ask Senator Hall for his parting thoughts, and I want to come back to China for a minute and then just give a quick review for anybody who maybe was invited by a friend to this webinar that's not familiar with some of the work that we do at the center. Senator Hall, what parting thoughts do you have or requests do you have for this audience?
Well, let me begin by saying there's another aspect of this bill that we didn't quite talk about, and that is the recognition that we have some very important critical infrastructure that must survive also. Just having our power grid is not enough. We've got to have communications, water, sewer, emergency services, etc. This bill includes the planning and development for that protection of that rest of the critical infrastructure to make for resilient communities. So, and that part of it will be up to the communities to pursue, but it will be tied in with what we're doing to protect the grid, so that when we do have an issue and the grid survives, we want to make sure that we have communications, we have water, we have sewer, we have emergency services, financial services, etc. And we're calling that our Resilient Communities program that'll be a part of it. The last thing I would say is that those of you who are here in Texas, make sure your rep and your senator knows that you support this, that you are behind it, want it to happen. Those of you who have a relationship with our governor and lieutenant governor, make sure they understand, particularly our governor. Our lieutenant governor has been really good about making sure it got out of the Senate in the past. I don't think I don't have as much concern with that as I do with the governor. Just if you do have a relationship, any encouragement you can give him that this is the right bill at the right time, and we just can't wait on this another session.
Totally concur. Senator Hall, thank you so much. And then just for the rest of our viewers, I appreciate everybody taking the time. I know some couldn't make it, and we're going to record this and send it to them. But for those of you that stopped everything else you were doing today to tune in and to listen to these courageous lawmakers, we are grateful for your time. We're grateful for your support, whether it is the activism like Senator Hall just requests, or it's the resources. As we mentioned before, we're a nonprofit national security organization. We don't take any money from the government. We don't take any money from the utilities. We don't take any money from the companies that could make money protecting utilities. It is literally only possible by people like you who are willing to support. And so for those of you that are new to the Center for Security Policy, just know it's not just the grid. As Representative Tinderholt talked about China, we have numerous portfolios focused on China. Adam Sabat, who's on right now, is managing one of those. Frank is managing another called the Committee on the Present Danger China. We also have focuses on a lot of other threats. And one of the things, we don't have time to talk about it today, Senator Hall, I want to make sure I send this to you, is just published. It's not public yet. One of my colleagues, Kyle Scheidler, did a bit of research on what was Antifa doing during the blackout and in the wake of the blackout. Antifa linked organizations in Houston, in Dallas, that were taking advantage of this power outage to do what seems like humanitarian things, raising over $200,000, and in some cases helping people out, but perhaps in a worrisome pattern. So there's no other organization that I know of that can provide the watchdog analysis to these big tech, big industries like the electric power industry, and at the same time have an unconstrained analysis of all of the rest of the threat landscape. And so I would just ask you all to do is to consider either for yourselves or who else do you know that would be willing to open, your place of business or your home in the coming weeks and months, particularly during this legislative session, to some more conversations, more briefings of the people that you know, and more brainstorming on how together all of us can solve this problem. As Senator Hall and Representative Tinderholt both said, it's going to take a lot more than just the elected officials. It's going to take the people. And so we're at your service to be able to come and to brief the people, to mobilize the people, and to organize them to have an impact to make sure that that the lights can keep shining in the Lone Star State. So thank you all for your time. Senator, thank you for staying on. I wish we had more time to share with y'all. I know y'all got to all get back to work. And please do mark your calendars. 1 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, March 24th will be our next public webinar where we're going to talk about this again. So thanks again, everybody, and mark your calendars. 24 March. We'll see you again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tommy. God bless you all.